learning at school on an empty stomach. Contrast that, friends, with the awful Tory proposals before Parliament recently. So voting Labour on May the 3rd will help to protect the services that people rely on from Tory cuts. We will put the interests of the people first. Nationally and locally, Labour will invest in people, in our public services and in the industries of the future. Politics is a question of priorities, and nothing highlights the crisis in local government more than what's happening to children's services. Even the Tory-controlled Local Government Association is saying that £2 billion is needed to properly fund our services to children and young people. Yet in November's autumn budget, there wasn't a penny extra for these hard-pressed services, but a £5 billion tax cut to the bank levy. They are the wrong priorities, and it does not have to be like this. It is time for a change. Don't let Conservative cuts hold us back any longer. So on the 3rd of May, I urge you all, campaign for Labour victories in councils across England. Vote Labour for the many, not the few. And it's now my great pleasure to introduce Barbara Keeley MP, the Shadow Cabinet Minister for Older People and Social Care.
Thank you, Andrew, for that introduction and for all your good words. I'm delighted to be here today to help launch Labour's local election campaign. It's so important that we support our fantastic, hard-working Labour councillors here in Trafford and our great campaigning candidates here and across the country. That's why we were here, to help elect a Labour council. Trafford deserves a Labour council again. I know how important it is to have a Labour-run council here because I helped run the Labour council here in Trafford for 9 years. We know that Labour councils are fighting to help vulnerable people despite the Tory cuts to social care services, which are doing so much damage, not just in Trafford, but right across the country. The facts are clear. 8 years of cuts to council budgets have hollowed out our social care system. It means vulnerable people, old and young, are getting less care than they used to, or worse, getting no care at all. We now hear that people with advanced dementia are being evicted from care homes on the grounds of cost, and that families cannot find a care home place for a relative with advanced dementia because providers can cherry-pick the people to whom they're going to give care. Now, this lack of care heaps pressure upon unpaid family carers, many of whom are struggling to balance work and caring. And far too often, the social care that people do get is just not good enough. Here in Trafford, almost half of all care homes get the lowest quality ratings. And the cuts, what do they mean? They mean that care staff, many of whom are underpaid, undervalued and overworked, cannot give the care they want to give. Many care staff have battled through the appalling weather we've had recently to give the care that is needed, and they are paid minimum wage or less. Now, we know that a Labour government will ease this crisis, but we also know the difference a Labour-run council can make, even in times of austerity. Just look at my own council, Salford, run by our City Mayor Paul Dennett, and neighbouring Manchester City Council, who have both taken action to pay care staff a real living wage, and many Labour councils are doing the same. Those are Labour values put into practice, improving lives, benefiting people with care needs and the staff who care for them, and benefiting unpaid family carers. And that's why Trafford needs a Labour council again. We are working hard across the country to bring in the Labour government we all need and want to see, so that councils will have the resources to help more people to get the good quality care they depend on, to live with dignity, to live independently, to live the lives they want to live. The next Labour government will invest more in social care, enough to pay all care staff up and down the country a real living wage, to give people the care they need when they need it, and we will give unpaid carers the better support they need to carry on caring. That's the future. Social care fit for the many, not just the few. Now, I have just talked about the crisis in social care, and I would now like to introduce my colleague, the Shadow Housing Secretary, John Healey, to talk about how Labour will tackle the housing crisis, which also affects people of all ages. John.
Thank you, Barbara. Ask people about housing these days, and 70% believe there's a housing crisis. And they're right. Everyone knows someone who can't get the home they need or they aspire to. They'll say the crisis is getting worse, not better. And again, they're right. 1 million people on council waiting lists, and yet Tory ministers have backed fewer than 1,000 newly built social rented homes last year. People sleeping on the streets risen every year since 2010, yet Tory ministers have cut support for specialist housing, including for the homeless, by almost a half. The cost of private rent soaring well ahead of wages, yet Tory ministers won't act to give private renters the right to longer tenancies, rent controls, or minimum legal standards. The level of home ownership is the lowest for 30 years, and there are 1 million fewer under 45s now owning a home than there were in 2010. And yet Tory ministers have slashed support for new affordable homes, both to rent and to buy. And you know, we're now councils in all parts of the country must be at the heart of our plan to fix the housing crisis. Conservative ministers have cut their funds, weakened their powers, and blocked them from building. So these local elections in 6 weeks' time are a chance for people to send a message to Theresa May and to the Tories that they want politicians who will fix the housing crisis, and they want a political party who will help with the housing pressures they face and not make those problems worse. And these elections are a chance for people to choose who they want standing up for them, who they want working for them and for their area. And you know, as Jeremy Corbyn said yesterday at Prime Minister's questions in the House of Commons, with Labour councils, you pay less and you get more. Well, I tell you, the figures also show with Labour councils, you pay less and you get more homes built. And despite the toughest cuts and constraints imposed by Conservative ministers, you get Labour councils, like Birmingham, building nearly a third of all the new homes across that city, including many for social rent. You get Exeter building new council homes that are ultra-efficient, ultra-green to passive house standards. You get Enfield setting up a new housing company to build and run the homes that families in temporary accommodation in that borough need. And you get Newcastle licensing private landlords to crack down on the worst who are ripping off tenants and flouting the law. So in 6 weeks' time, on May the 3rd, we're saying to people, look to Labour, vote for Labour for help with the housing crisis. Thank you. And Now it's my pleasure to introduce someone who really in this audience needs no introduction. It's our Labour Shadow Home Secretary, Diane Abbott.
I'm very pleased to be here in Trafford at our local government campaign launch. 30 years ago, I was a Labour councillor, and I believe it's one of the most rewarding roles in our Labour family, and I think it's one of the most important roles in our Labour family. Very occasionally, councillors may be undervalued, but I can assure you that under the leadership of Jeremy Corbyn, councillors will have their voice and they will have a key and vital role. We know that Labour in local government brings communities together. We don't play off communities against each other. We don't scapegoat communities. One of our most important issues is how we bring communities together. We know that Labour in local government keeps communities safe. We will all remember the horror of the Grenfell fire, which could have happened in any community up and down the country. And I was talking to a policeman a few days ago who was one of the first responders at Grenfell. And he said one of the things that still haunts him is the children at the windows at the top of the block who no one was going to be able to save. That Grenfell was a direct consequence of deregulation, outsourcing, privatisation, and Labour in local government will be turning back that tide to keep our people safe. And we know that Labour in local governments keeps communities free from crime. The Tories talk the talk on law and order, but we are the ones that are walking the walk and keeping communities free from crime. We know that police records show rising offences with weapons, a spate of cowardly and awful knife and acid attacks, rising sexual offences, and the horrible phenomenon of spice and the people whose lives are ruined by taking that and other drugs. And just 1 year ago, we saw the dreadful, murderous attack in the Manchester arena. And there were 4 terror attacks across Britain last year. And we know we owe a lot to Andy Burnham and the leadership that he showed after the Manchester arena attack. So on a day-to-day level, despite the Tory lies, frankly, we see some of the most serious crime rising. We're facing a lethal terrorist threat. The pressures on the police are enormous. Some police forces are taking days to respond to 999 calls, struggling to deal with these emergency calls. And what have the Tories done? They've cut the police. They've axed 21,000 officers since 2010. Thousands more back office staff have been cut. And those back office staff, you know, are vital so the police can do their job properly. But back office staff, officers, they've both been axed by the Tories. But we will recruit 10,000 more police officers. We will do what needs to be done to keep communities safe. We should be proud to be campaigning in these forthcoming local elections. We have a great offer on policing and law and order and community safety that we can be putting forward on the doorstep. And more than anything else, perhaps, these local elections on May the 3rd and the victories that we're going to have are going to be the first step in putting Jeremy Corbyn in number 10. gives me great pleasure to introduce a friend of nearly 40 years, an inspirational Labour leader, and the next Prime Minister of this country, Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you so much all for being here this morning. And I thank the school for giving us the space this morning. What a wonderful place this school is. And they gave me a recyclable mug this morning to drink my tea in forevermore. So thank you very much for all of that. And it's wonderful being here in Trafford to launch the local election campaigns for the party. But before I do so, I want to talk about the terrorist attack in Westminster a year ago today, when PC Keith Palmer was killed along with others, and more than 50 people were injured. Later today, I'll be attending a service in Westminster to remember the bravery of the police and pay our respects to all those who died. Aisha Faradi, Kurt Cochrane, Leslie Rhodes, Andrea Christia, and PC Keith Palmer. Can we just all remember them as people, wholly innocent people, who lost their lives in what was an attack on our democracy? On the 3rd of May, there will be elections in many towns and cities in England. And I'm joined this morning by many council leaders and councillors and council candidates for our Labour Party from all over the country. I want to take this opportunity of thanking all of them for the public service they do and give, the commitment they show to our communities, all they do to try and prevent our communities being destroyed by Tory cuts. And I want them to be able to work under a Labour government in the future that will properly support them, that will properly fund them, that will value local government, not denigrate it in the way that this Tory government does. Thank you for all that you do. This year, more than ever, it's vital for people to vote Labour, for a Labour council to protect and support your community. On May the 3rd, people have the chance to send an unmistakable message to this government that enough is enough. Enough of cuts to vital services that hurt local communities. Enough of cuts to schools, hospitals and local policing. Enough of library and youth centres closures. Enough of leaving elderly and disabled people without essential care. And enough of failed privatisations that suck funds out of public services so a few can make a profit at the expense of the rest of us. Over the last 8 years, this Conservative government has cut councils' budgets in half. One Conservative council has already gone bust as a result of this process. At that same time, this government has cut corporation tax, cut the bank levy, abolished the top tax rate on high earners and cut capital gains tax for the very richest. Austerity is a political choice the Tories and the Lib Dems made. So when your children's school is losing teachers and having to send begging letters to parents, or the youth centre is closed, that's because the Conservative priority is tax breaks for big business and the rich, not funding the services that the rest of us rely on and need. And when your elderly relatives are neglected for lack of social care, that's because the Conservatives want another tax giveaway for a few people at the top. Decent people who contributed all their lives have been turned into an item on a spreadsheet, sliced and diced into 15-minute units of care because of Conservative cuts and privatisation dogma. It doesn't have to be like this. Labour in government would do things very differently. And Labour councils across the country are doing things very differently right now. Look at the number of Labour councils that are accredited as paying the living wage to all council staff and contractors. My own borough of Islington was one of the first in the country to do so, and I'm very proud of that. And look across London. Conservative Wandsworth is not a living wage borough, but next door, Labour Lambeth is. Tory Westminster is not, but neighbouring Labour Camden pays the living wage. And here, in Greater Manchester, just down the road, Salford Labour Council is a living wage council, but Conservative-led Trafford is not. And with pay lower today than it was in 2010, we need local councils to be doing what they can to boost their local economies. More and more people are finding it hard to make ends meet. Bills are going up, and many young people can't afford to move out of home or put enough by each month to save for a deposit. Philip Hammond may have proclaimed there is light at the end of the tunnel, but the stark reality was revealed by the government's own official forecasts, predicting weak growth in real earnings and even weaker growth in real disposable incomes. That's from the government itself. Meanwhile, the country's housing crisis is deepening. It's a crisis that has left 120,000 children, get that figure, 120,000 children in temporary accommodation without a home to call their own. That's gone up by 2/3 since 2010. They made the choice of austerity, and it's the most vulnerable children that are paying the price of it. That's what Tories do. Homelessness has more than doubled, and fewer people are able to afford to buy their own home. It's in response to this crisis that Birmingham Labour Council has set up Birmingham Municipal Housing Trust to build more council houses. They've built around 2,500 new homes in the last 3 years, more than 20% of all new homes built in Birmingham since 2011. But under this government, the number of new social rented homes being started has fallen from 40,000 with Labour to fewer than 1,000 last year. Labour will build the homes people need and ensure developers build genuinely affordable housing. Too often, under the Conservatives, the essential things in life have been left to the market. The collapse of private outsourcing companies like Carillion should have been a wake-up call for the government. But it's Labour councils that are dealing with a crisis manufactured in Downing Street and Whitehall. Take Croydon. The Conservative council privatised the libraries and outsourced the workforce to Carillion. When Carillion collapsed, it was the Labour council that saved the libraries and people's jobs by bringing them back in-house. Labour councils are cleaning up the Tories' mess time and time again and acting as a human shield against damaging Conservative cuts. But it's a different story when it comes to Conservative councils. Northamptonshire bragged it was pioneering the Easy Council model. EasyJet would have been ashamed of it. The Conservative council outsourced over 95% of its 4,000 staff. They were transferred to 4 new service providers, run like private companies with payment of dividends. Last month, we learned the council had run out of money and its leader had resigned, blaming the Conservative government. That's not efficient management. It's reckless gambling with people's lives and the public services that the people rely on. But this same slash and burn model is still being used by Barnet Council, also run by the Conservatives, where Capita holds contracts, get this, with an estimated value of £500 million. Privatisation has failed to deliver on the railways, in the water companies, and with energy too. People are paying more for less. That's what you get with the Tories. You pay more for less, so that their super-rich backers can take a cut for themselves. It's common sense that natural monopolies like water, energy and rail and public services should be there to serve us all, not as profit margins of a few. That's why Robin Hood Energy, an energy company set up by Nottingham Labour Council, is so important. If we're serious about meeting our climate change goals, we need to allow councils to invest, to tackle poor air quality and to defend green spaces. The energy companies have failed to invest in renewables. They failed to keep energy bills affordable. And again, it's Labour councils, with their spirit of public enterprise and practical municipal socialism, that are finding solutions, even in the toughest times. And times are certainly tough for the councils, trying to provide local services with half their budget cut since 2010. And the 10 most deprived council areas in England have been subjected to cuts higher than the national average. What that means on the ground in local communities is that over 400 libraries have closed, more than 600 youth centres have been shut down, 1.2 million elderly people not getting the care they need and deserve, and many people with disabilities suffering the same indignity. Last year, 400 women were turned away from refuges because they simply didn't have space. Many of those women fleeing with their children from violent homes and frightening situations. In England alone, 2 women are killed every single week by a partner or an ex-partner. Finding safety in a women's refuge can quite literally be a matter of life and death. Yet a fifth of all women's refuges have been forced to close since 2010. So when Theresa May talks about burning injustices, remember the reality her government is presiding over. More children growing up in poverty, life expectancy falling for the first time in living memory, our National Health Service in crisis with the numbers of GPs and nurses falling, crime up and 20,000 fewer police on our streets, more people forced to rely on food banks, and more than twice as many people sleeping rough on our streets. Yet all the while, the government has found billions of pounds in tax giveaways for the very richest and big business. That is Conservative Britain. And who's footing the bill? Christine knows. She's just one of thousands of people who write to me every week. The police precept in Hampshire is going up by 7.3%, despite police cuts in her area. It's the same message again. Pay more for less. Police funding has fallen by 1/5 since 2010. The thin blue line is getting ever thinner. And the police inspectorate today warning that 999 calls are sometimes not responded to for days, as Diane explained. And that some forces are so stretched that lives of vulnerable people are being put at risk. Empty shops suck the life out of high streets and local communities. And yet, local businesses and small shops that are the lifeblood of our communities and that wonderful sense of community you get with a thriving high street and thriving town centre will see their rates increased by over £3,000, again, as basic services are cut. That means many of those businesses will simply close and be replaced by empty shops and roller shutters. The message from Theresa May's government could not be clearer. Pay more to get less under the Conservatives. And pay more for less is precisely the message from Conservative-run Leicestershire County Council, where residents face £50 million of cuts this year and a council tax increase of just under 6%. Their Conservative deputy leader of the council blamed chronically low government funding. Every day, people see what the dilemmas facing local councils mean in practice. As Edna, who wrote to me last week, put it, councils are having to sell off artwork, close museums, sell off parks, close libraries, just to survive. The poor and middle class are losing out on their quality of life. It's not just in Leicestershire. The Conservative leader of Surrey County Council said recently, "We're facing the most difficult financial crisis in our history. The government cannot stand idly by while Rome burns." He has a sense of culture. But it is standing by and passing the buck to local councils. And so, on May the 3rd, there is no need to stand by. No need to accept you have to pay more to get less. Use your vote to send the message that enough is enough. It doesn't have to be like this. After 8 years of Conservative cuts, failed privatisations, falling living standards, it's time for real change. Labour will give dignity and support to those in need. We don't walk by on the other side. We will rebuild our communities and transform our country for the many, not the few. Thank you.
Thanks, mate. Thanks. I'm glad we've got matching ties.
Okay, we'll take some questions. I'm principally looking over at the media area, but I will take some other questions as well. I'll take the lady there, the gentleman there, and the gentleman behind.
Hiya, my name's Helen Pidd. I'm the North of England editor of The Guardian. I recently moved from Tory-run Trafford to Labour-run Stockport, and I now pay more council tax. I just wondered, in order to pay for the things that you want to do with social care, the national living wage, etc., can people expect higher council tax bills if their councils turn Labour in May? Thank you.
The second question. Yep.
Yeah, so I'm Andy Bounds from the Financial Times, newspaper of the year, just get that in case Mr Corbyn doesn't read it every day.
FT.
You say that austerity is a political choice. On the face of it, it seems quite a popular one. The Conservatives have more councils, more councillors at the moment, and they're ahead of the national polls. You even lost the Tees Valley mayoralty to them. So how are you going to convince people that it's the wrong political choice and that Labour can actually change things for people, not just in big cities, but in the suburbs and the places where the Tory voters are? And a very quick supplementary, are you and the Labour Party going to delete your Facebook accounts?
And the person